Happy birthday to the baby boomers who are this year turning 80, or the first of the baby boomers are turning 80. Despite people living longer and this baby boomer demographic that we've known about for 80 years now, the system's unprepared for older people in the Illawarra and Shoalhaven, with no appreciable growth in aged care beds in the last 10 years. This is resulting in more and more people being stuck in the healthcare system and in hospitals across our region. I'm Nicky Sloan, CEO of Community Industry Group, and I'm coming to you today from the beautiful lands of the Dharawal people. Welcome to Community Matters, the podcast where we dive into the heart of community solutions and the people making a difference. Today we're joined by Mark Sewell. Mark is an aged care consultant, a former well-known aged care CEO, and is also a director on the board of Ageing Australia, which is the peak body for aged care services in Australia. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Nicky.
Mark, you've been exposed to this issue for many years, and until recently you were working in the aged care sector. It's a critical concern. Could you explain to our listeners why it's happening and why it's a shared problem across both our aged and our healthcare providers?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's called a crisis because it definitely is for the people directly involved, but it actually has its roots in two very big pieces of demography that are good news. As you mentioned earlier, the baby boomers are turning 80, and that starts a 20-year journey of a very big population bubble of people born after the Second World War. And of course, the First World War, the Great Depression and the Second World War means not many people had babies. Obviously, the world was in a dreadful situation. But from 1945, when the Second World War ended and Australia started its boom generation of services and housing and peace, babies arrived. There must be something happens after the troops come home. I won't go into that now, but certainly many, many more babies. And so we've got more people. Many more people coming through from 1945. We've also got the second big piece of demography, which is people are living longer, much, much longer. My grandmother, born in the late 1800s, when she was born, the average age of passing away in Australia was just 50. The average age of passing away in Australia, not that long ago, just my grandmother. So anyway, any 50-year-olds you know or older on borrowed time back then. When I was born in 1960, the average age of passing away in Australia was 65. So I'm 65 this year. So back in the 60s, I'm kaput. But now it's 83, 84, soon to be 85. That's an incredible shift from 50 to 65 to 83 or 84 of extra years. So we have many more people, and we have much, much longer lives. And those two big pieces of good news mean we have, in the next 20 years, a doubling of the people in Australia over 65 and a tripling of the people over 85. And that's very exciting. We've known it's coming. Demography is the most easily mapped future trend because people are born and they live a long life, and we know for a long, long life what that will be. But it's caught us a bit by surprise because we also have an amazing aged care system. And we have in the 50s and 60s a lot of residential care homes built in Australia. Many of the organisations locally across our region started then and grew their services since then. We have 250,000 Australians living in residential care any one day. We also have retirement villages, and not every country has retirement villages, but Australia has quite a lot. We have another 250,000 older Australians living in retirement living, and they grew rapidly in the 1970s. And we also have something that other countries don't have, which is home care services. Most countries have a little bit of home support, home nursing, if you like, and we've had home nursing for a long time. But in the 80s, the home and community care program grew rapidly, and we now have 1 million Australians receiving some sort of care at home or drop-in support at home to keep them there. So that's an amazing system of supports for older Australians. The trouble is retirement villages and home care have grown rapidly in the last 10 or 20 years. Residential aged care, where you get 24/7 care in a good place to live, hasn't grown at all. In fact, this area, it's been completely static. 700 new places to live have been built by some of our most impressive organisations. But at the same time, 700 beds or places to live have closed due to a whole range of factors that we can talk about. So that's a static thing. And the population, as I said, is going gangbusters of seniors, but we do not have enough places for older people to live. So where do people who have a long, long life live? After their 30 years, after they've retired, they live really well for quite a while. But eventually it catches up, and not only aches and pains and arthritis, but then illness and mobility issues and orthopaedic challenges and maybe cancer and certainly dementia for some. And so people need 24/7 care. They go to hospital. They get whisked off in an ambulance, they go to hospital, but there's no, when they're discharged or need to be discharged, they can't go home very often because they need that 24/7 support. And so they end up stuck in hospital without a residential care system to receive them. So that's the challenge we're in, and that's why it's called a crisis.
It's interesting, we've heard that aged care has changed, it's become an open market. We've got huge demand, we've just heard about that. Yep. We've got people trapped in hospital because there aren't enough beds. And we just heard from Margot Mains just recently that we are 1,000 beds short in our region. Does that mean the market has failed?
It's a very interesting phenomena. People often don't realise this. So I'm glad you've asked the question about how are other systems different, because it's the same person. When my mother-in-law falls at home, she gets whisked off by an ambulance to the hospital. Then after the hospital manages her care, then she may need to go to a residential care system. It's the same person in home getting home care, in hospital getting hospital care, and then going to residential care to get 24/7 care. The funding systems are entirely different, and the philosophies of service system are different. So in hospital, Margot is here because she has a public mandate. A hospital can't close its doors. It's always open for you as a general hospital. You go in an ambulance, you go to the ED, the doors are wide open, and in you go. And it just takes more and more people, and it grows to respond to that if it can. Aged care is different. It's privatised. It's been privatised for quite a long time now. It's actually losing some of its federal Commonwealth planning regime on top. And so Margot has an open public mandate, but if you operate an aged care service, you have to be cautious. You're a private organisation, whether you're a charity, community-owned or private for-profit, you have a caution imposed upon you to not exceed your resources, to make sure the organisation continues to operate well. So you're capped based on your funding. So Margot just has to keep receiving all the people of this great region, regardless of her capacity. She has to meet their needs as a public mandate. But aged care providers say, no, I have enough people. I can't take any more. We've found an extra couple of places for a couple more, but that's it, I'm afraid. The board of directors, the managers, the government funders say, no, this is how many people you'll take and no more. So it's beholden to the private system to grow and become larger. And it's extremely complex to build and to operate and to staff a 24/7 residential care system for older people for the last 2 or 3 years of their life. And that's why that system's been constrained and is quite differently operated under a different philosophy and hasn't grown to keep pace with the population.
It's interesting because we hear a lot of talk about these wealthy aged care providers and why aren't they just building more? Why aren't they just building more?
Because they can see older people coming. They know the numbers are there. They're private organisations and there's massive need. We recently had an Aged Care Royal Commission in Australia. It unpacked a lot of evidence from a lot of people about what's happening to aged care in Australia. It noted that residential care providers were grossly underfunded for about 20 years. The staff were grossly underpaid compared to all their other counterparts. The compliance system was onerous and rigorous and often led to people giving up and closing. The boards of these places needed governance training and needed to be confident governors of an expanding system, but they often weren't there. They're often volunteers. There's a whole lot of other factors. The building costs to build a residential aged care home, it's not like building a couple of cottages. It's more like building a small hospital because it needs to be suitable for people. And you need to find a couple of hectares of land in a well-located place, buy it, compete against developers, have a sympathetic council because you're trying to develop something which is quite unusual, a residential aged care facility or a system. And all those factors meant not many people, not many organisations decided to do more and more and more of it. Thank God the organisations in this area did in fact rescue many that were going to close. And we've had quite a few organisations give up, found it very hard, too hard. They wanted to keep going. They have a very strong community bias and intent to keep going, but couldn't. But other organisations in this area rescued those places and kept them going. We could have lost another 500 beds easily, but we didn't because of those local providers doing their part. But almost no one's found a way to expand rapidly. Now, the government's done some things now, recently, as a result of the Royal Commission recommendations, and we do hope that's going to change the supply and it will slowly start to grow again. But older people aren't coming to us in a slow and delayed way. There is a very large group, a very large wave of people coming that is the result of all those great things I talked about, but there's a relentless demographic number coming each year and they can't wait. If they end up with an illness or needing 24/7 care, they'll often end up in hospital for months and months and months.
And thank you for calling out those organisations that rescued some of our providers who were going to close. Yeah. That some of our great CI group members stepped up and took on some of those facilities. Yeah. It's a wicked problem. Clearly. But Community Industry Group, we're really focused on solutions. What do you think can be done?
Wow, a lot of things can be done, but it takes a bit of time. The first thing we want to do is residential care services that are here. There's about 4,000 beds across the Illawarra and Shoalhaven area. It sounds like a lot, but it's actually not nearly enough. We know that there needs to be another 1,000 beds based on recent academic research that Community Industry Group has done. So we want to talk to every single provider, do whatever we can to make sure they're maximising all their existing services and see who is keen to expand. If we can do anything to encourage a service to expand, maybe to put another floor on, and put another, quite a few places for people to live there, or the block next door, or the block down the road. If we can grow the system again, because it grew rapidly in the 60s, 70s and 80s in this area. It paused through various things, financial pressures mostly, that happened. We hope it takes off again now with some recent intervention, but there often needs to be local ambitious community-owned organisations that can give courage and advice. We also want to grow the home care system. There's a lot of people who just want to stay at home and they go to hospital and the doctor stands at the foot of the bed and says to the family, okay, if you want mum to go home, this is going to take a lot of support. We need to get someone to come regularly, maybe a nurse, not just a carer, not just a cleaner, but someone who can come and help mum with medications and checking her vital signs. We also need to modify the home, so home modification programs are really critical. We also need to have the family all chip in to assist and visit on a regular basis. We need social workers to ask, what about the neighbours and the whole community? So home care, there are really incredible home care providers who would like to set up very fast, comprehensive whole-of-life support services for people who need to go home. But the home care system is constrained as well. It's hard to get the funding, there are delays with assessment, and it's hard to find the workforce. So we can improve the home care system as well as improving the residential care system. Housing. Not everyone who's 70, 80 or 90 lives in the most suitable housing for older people. I know people who have been in their houses for 50, 60 or 70 years. Those houses were quite nice when they were young, active families, and they're there now. So getting people to live in a more suitable environment where they can live more independently and safely is quite a challenge. So housing changes need to happen. I would love carers, family carers, to get more support. There's not a lot of carer support programs that are improving and escalating, and people would drop their job a day a week if they had some financial recompense and they would like to provide care for their parents or their grandparents if they could. Sometimes grandchildren or nieces and nephews would also like to help if they were to receive some sort of allowance or assistance. And getting carers together in support groups so they can share notes about what it's like to see mum or dad or grandparents decline over the years with dementia or confusion is a emotional burden to see, but having carers talk about it together and learn what that's like could make a really big difference. We need our GPs to really be focused on older people and to not think their practices thrive best on active families that arrive, but actually think about their practices thriving on seniors living in their own homes across the community where they may need to go occasionally and see the person in their own home. And of course, the last thing I wanted to mention is hospitals. We actually need hospitals to be more suitable for older people to stay long term if that's what happens. So hospitals are the least likely and the least successful place to live long term. They're very good if you're sick and you get fixed. And most of us get fixed within 4 days and get discharged after a few days, but older people often end up in hospital for months on end. And there needs to be special places that are set up for seniors in hospitals, maybe places where you could bring some of your private possessions, places where there's a courtyard with your grandchildren and great-grandchildren can visit and be with you, place where geriatricians and other assessors are together, and that's where people transition then to the next place, either back home or to a permanent residential care place. So there's quite a few areas of improvement that I think could happen, and I guess it's quite clear that CI Group, we want to do those things, don't we? Want to do all of them if we can.
Absolutely, and we were chatting with Margot Main, CEO of the local health district. Margot was mentioning that the average older person is in hospital for 66 days, and you talked about a special transition place for older people. Margot spoke about the decomposition of people when they are in hospital for extended time. So do you think that a special transition place for older people will address that?
I think it will address it. There's no blame on the hospital system. The hospital system is not set up for people who have finished their treatment, who are homeless and can't go home, who live for months on end. It's doing its best. But often older people get moved around from hospital to hospital to hospital because that ward is set up to deal with other issues, acute clinical issues, and people coming in get selected for that bed as a priority, and the older person who's occupying that place gets moved somewhere else. The last thing someone who's got a bit of confusion or distress that they left their family home by ambulance a month ago and hasn't been able to go home needs, the last thing they need is to be moved to other hospital wards and even other hospitals across the region. So to have somewhere where they go and they stay, they can build some friendships and relationships. There are aged care experts because the aged care system, as I said, is a little bit different to the hospital system. Imagining having a hospital staff who understand those differences, working with those people. So we are really working hard to find a suitable location, and we're going to encourage the state health system and the Commonwealth aged care system to joint fund that kind of program, because that would help for the next few years whilst aged care providers start to get confident again or find a way to grow their service system.
Mm-hmm. We spoke with Margot about the collaborative effort needed, and you've outlined aged care providers, home care providers, residential providers. You've outlined the state and federal government, the health department. It seems like there are a lot of people that need to come together to address this. Is there anything that our listeners could be doing to help alleviate the issue?
I'm really pleased if people are listening, because not many people know about this. It's quite extraordinary that the largest demographic shift in our whole society is the ageing of the population and the rapid increase in numbers. The community is very aware of the other specialist human services we have for children and people with disabilities and so on. But not many people understand this, so it's really fantastic that people are learning about it. If you have a parent or a grandparent or a person you know, a neighbour, or anyone who's a senior who's an older person in and out of hospital or living at home on their own or needing support or worried about aged care or retirement living, the best thing we can all do is give confidence to people that there is a good system and that doing some homework is the best thing to make sure the person makes their own choices. Occasionally I give seminars to older people about what they can do quite a while before they get into the hospital system or into any of the full-time aged care systems. And I ask people who would like their children or their neighbour to make all the decisions for them when they turn 80 or 90 or more. No one puts their hand up. Most of us really want to make our own decisions and have our own preferences. Older people have been through so much in their lives. When you think about when an older person in their 80s or 90s was born, the enormous changes they've navigated through. Some of them have suffered dreadful things, work and employment changes, loss of children, they've seen a spouse pass away. They want to take control. And the more we can include them in these decision panels and task forces, the more we can include them in our family and community discussions, the more we can have discussions about the options for mum or dad or others as the time arises. There's no way you want to be pushing anyone to make decisions ahead of time. But what a great thing it is to know a person's wishes ahead of time, so when the time arises, we know what they want. And some people I've met are absolutely determined to stay at home on their own despite the risks. Others really want to know what residential care is like, or retirement villages are like, or how much it will cost, or what it would take, and which ones are close, and which ones are near the grandchildren or the children. That kind of homework is really essential, and almost no one does it. Almost no one, we found. So anything we can do in that area with older people and their families and their communities, that would be great. The other thing is reminding our politicians, our decision makers, that this is a big issue and this affects the whole community. And older people shouldn't be living in temporary health accommodation. There should be tailored solutions funded by the community, but also joint funded by people themselves if they have means. A lot of older people don't have cash, they don't have superannuation funds and those kind of things that are more modern, and they'll be a big asset for us when we're older. But people do have assets, and understanding what contribution people can make is very important. But we need our governments to understand that this demographic shift in our population needs policy response. And we need to make sure, I had a study tour in Japan and I saw lots of great things. We need to make sure that all our shops, all our government buildings, all our buses and trains, our housing, our new housing, our hospitals, everything is senior friendly. Our pamphlets, our booklets, our information. I assist a couple of people who don't have a mobile phone and don't have an email address. Do you know how hard it is to do banking or to change the titles on a house if their spouse passes away, or open up a Medicare account or check Medicare balances, or without a MyGov email? These kind of things need tolerance and response to make sure older people remain in charge of their own destinies.
That's a lot to think about. Thank you for that. Mark, this podcast is called Community Matters. Could you tell us a story about a person or people in our community that matter to you?
Yeah, it's really hard not to get personal because my father and mother passed away during COVID. My mother first at the very start and my father in the middle of COVID, and they both lived in residential care towards the end. And I saw the amazingly great support system that provided for them. And I really deeply admire Mum and Dad for making that choice. Obviously, I could provide some advice about how good it is to have 24/7 care. All your Dad thought it was marvellous that he had all his meals prepared for him and he could stop doing any cleaning. He thought that was marvellous. And they were surrounded by people, staff, family, friends, and other residents that they got to know right through to the last day of their life in a really nice setting with their possessions, their books and their CDs and their plants around them. It was just really, really great. I've also had relatives who stayed at home, and I admire their resilience and their determination to put up with the risks that the family constantly warned them about. And every time they go into hospital, the hospital would say it's very risky at your home because you have too many steep stairs and fluffy mats and bathrooms that aren't suitable. But they were determined to do that, and the family wrapped around them, and we made it possible for them to do that. And so I am inspired by people who make their own choices, not always the most ideal for the family and the community and their own safety, but gosh, we shouldn't be telling a wise person who's lived for a long time what they must do. Generally, I want to copy and follow people I see who plan ahead, who make a decision to modify their home early on before it becomes a safety issue, who make a decision to live in a retirement community amongst people they don't need any maintenance on their home. There's a support structure in place. They have like-minded colleagues and friends and family, and they're ready. If one of the couple should need that full-time care, they're in the system to get that at the right time in a timely way. And I see people live longer and happier in those kind of communities. And I can think of a person named Peter who didn't really want to live in a retirement community. He had a very large house, lots of garden tools. He loved his garden and his hedges and his lawnmowers, tinkering with the cars. But he knew that he needed to make a decision for his wife to set them up. He didn't want something to happen and for her to manage the transition for the rest of her life. So he made a decision to live in a retirement village. And they had a warm community of friends. They really loved travelling. And something happened to him, and she has been fully supported by all her widow friends. She travels. She doesn't need to make a move because she was already set up well. I think that kind of planning ahead, that wise planning ahead, is a really good thing to do too. So I'm really inspired by him.
It's interesting you talk about people being older, being wise. And I think we live in quite an ageist society now, and we do tend to infantilise older people again. Yeah. Do you think ageism is playing a role in this whole BEDBLOCK issue?
It is. It's dreadful when you think that we have made such long improvements and great strides in improving sexism and racism. I think Australia still has those tendencies, but we've made so many improvements over the last 100 years, 50 years, and even continually. But ageism, we know when we talk to older people, they feel it all the time. And as they get older and older, they feel it more and more. And they know they get, as you said, treated like children. And they'll be standing in a shop, and they'll see everyone else served, and they'll be almost invisible to the shopkeepers, and they'll want to buy a car or a house or get their car for service, and people will ignore them and assume that they're stupid or can't deal with things. And that is an insidious thing that gets worse and worse as you get older. I would love for us all to celebrate ageing, to see the baby boom and longevity factors in Australia as marvellous things to celebrate. And maybe sometimes from a distance, people get a perception in their head that this person's not going to be active and fast and know all the information I know. But when you get to sit down and have a chat and listen to the person, gosh, the wisdom, the experience, the great stories of the person's life, the dreams and aspirations they have for the rest of their lives, which can be 10, 20 or 30 years to go. I know plenty of people in their 90s and early hundreds. That's a new thing in history, and that means people have a long time to go and shouldn't be shut out or not involved in life, in community life, economic life and social life way too early at all. So let's celebrate older people and make sure they don't feel any ageist tendencies either in government or the community, in the media or our own relationships locally.
That's fantastic. That's a fantastic point to end on, I think. You started saying that your grandmother's generation expected to die at 50, and now you're knowing people in their 90s and early hundreds. Yep. And I think that really reflects what a privilege it is to live in this time and what a privilege it is to get older.
Yep.
Thank you so much for coming in today, Mark. We've heard so much about the work you're doing, and I have to thank you personally because you're doing a lot of that work with us at Community Industry
Thank
Group.
you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to Community Matters. Please remember to subscribe, to like, to leave us a review and to share, and to tune in next time for more stories of innovation and of community. Until next time, Community Matters.